Hey guys, tonight we're dropping into a realm where life expectancy is about as short as your patience at a DMV, the medieval monastery. You might be thinking nuns, prayers and peace, but hold on to your modern day sanity. This ain't a quaint retreat for your soul. We're talking about a place where food is basically 500-year-old oatmeal, where the silence is only broken by your stomach rumbling, and where even the most dedicated monk might still secretly dream of life outside the stone walls. So before you settle in for this ride through the hilariously disastrous, grab a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. It's always interesting to see just how many of you are listening while pretending you have insomnia. Now, dim those lights, pop on a fan for that soothing hum of fresh air, or is it just that hay in your nostrils, and snuggle into the world that is far from cosy. Ever wondered if you'd be driven mad by the daily chant of your local monks? What if you lost your way while getting a cup of bad ale in the refectory? Would you survive years of carving wooden spoons, or would you long for the taste of a pizza? There's no delivery service here, and believe me, your taste buds are going to have a rough awakening. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1300, and the only thing colder than the stone walls is your breakfast. A nice bowl of boiled cabbage, the highlight of your week. The early morning light barely filters through the grimy, slatted windows, and let's be honest, you've already ruled out any possibility of a sunny day in this frosty prison. Your bed? A hay-stuffed mat that doubles as a home for fleas, reassuringly reminding you that personal space is merely a concept lost to history. You blink awake, snuggled in your woolen cloak that hasn't been near soap in a while, and wonder, who decided that comfortable should smell like wet sheep? Slowly you rise to an even more disheartening reality, the unyielding chill of the monastery air. You pull on your woolen tunic which, if we're being diplomatic, looks like it's been through a bad relationship with a washing river that decided not to wash anything at all. The colour? A mystery shade best described as dirt. You've never understood how laundry could be a source of peace. By now, your body resembles the interior of the hovel. Well used, would not even begin to cover it. As you shuffle across the floor, the cold bracing your bare feet, you contemplate the pros and cons of your new home. Sure, it's full of holy men, and who wouldn't want to share space with a bunch of folks keen on chanting and living conservatively? But the perks of the modern world, like proper heating, personal hygiene, and a distinct lack of biting insects, seem to grow fainter with each passing chilly morning. It's now abundantly clear that thanks to your new lifestyle, you're expected to form a close, personal bond with those embarrassingly persistent fleas. With a sigh, you lumber over to the rickety wooden table that is your breakfast station. What awaits you? Surprise! A bowl of thin porridge that's seen better days, likely on a journey to find its definition of food. It slops onto your plate like a droopy, defeated creature that somehow found its way out of composting. You can't help but wonder if the spoon you're using might actually have been utilised for barn duties last week, and this is that many lives ago ancient relic of meal prep. As you sip on your sweet, lukewarm ale, because why drink water when the ale is possibly less contaminated? You overhear one monk enthusiastically debate whether to add more cabbage to tonight's soup, or just rely on last week's leftovers. You stifle a chuckle. This lively discussion could easily be confused with the cornerstone of an academic symposium, where the topics of debate are as varied as the aromas of last night's beans. God help you if anyone tries to bring new ingredients into the mix. With breakfast concluded, you realise it's time to begin your day in the beautiful institution of labour. Yes! Time to gather your energy and set out for whatever haunting tasks await you in the stone maze of the monastery. You've read that monks historically enjoyed a mix of prayer, work, and sometimes joyfully avoiding both. Restart that uplifting communal mindset. Striding towards the next task, You. Reflect on how long-term your future is looking here. Each day seems to meld into the next, and you can't remember if you signed up for eternal enlightenment, or a minor stint of forced imprisonment with some downtime reading through Bibles the size of a cow. Of course, you could simply choose to take an avoidant route, opt to stare longingly out of the sliding stone windows towards the world outside. With the chill nipping at your nose and the biting wind making you grateful for every patched robe, it feels like freedom is located just beyond the walls, taunting you like a long-lost friend that never writes back. But as chance would have it, this day could also mark a new beginning. Maybe it's simply time to get used to less chic living. Sure, nothing but the aroma of old hay and musty history fills your senses, but think of all the stories that lurk amid these crumbling stone walls. Who knows? You might just learn to find beauty tethered within the funny arrangements of life. A few teasing thoughts about how a modern person might abandon their smartphone for a hayloft utopia filled with nature's wonders, but probably not. As you fight through your cloistered existence, it might occur to you that the real challenge is embracing the absurdity of it all. Sunday dress, communal living, and cows not appearing in your daydreams. It could very well be your own way of discovering what makes life livable, gritty, and undeniably memorable. So, as you head off to your first task of the day, you silently vow that if you can survive breakfast and battle for healthy space in the daily grind, then perhaps, just maybe, you can survive a lifetime of nondescript elegance. Welcome to the refectory, where the simple act of breaking bread feels more like a contest of endurance than a meal. Sit down for breakfast, and if you can stomach the dubious stew that looks suspiciously similar to last week's leftovers, consider yourself lucky. Oh, is that a beetle flirting with your porridge? Plenty of protein, right? And don't even think about seasoning. Salt is a luxury reserved for the fancy folks with actual kitchens. As you navigate this sacred space of culinary challenges, the aroma wafting through the air can only be described as a blend of stale air and something resembling boiled cabbage. It is the kind of scent that might make you question your life choices yet again, reminding you of last night's questionable decision to finish off that hard bread, which is now staging a revolt within your stomach. Each morning feels like a regimented wrangle against your own resolve and stomach capacity. Truly, it's a miracle that anyone manages to smile around here when the only words that cross your lips are thank you, laced with a hint of trepidation. Seating arrangements do little to ease your mounting anxiety. Monks, clad in their flowing robes that look suspiciously like a cotton gathering of sadness, sit shoulder to shoulder, adhering to strict communal rules. Forget personal space. Here it's about survival of the fittest. You might even spot Brother Gregor eyeing your bowl with a gleam that suggests he wouldn't think twice about engaging in a bare-knuckle brawl over leftover gruel. Forks, knives, forget about them. Here you've mastered the ancient art of using your hands like an enthusiast at an unregulated buffet. And honestly, would the world ignite if you elected to scoop with your hands? Once you finally claim your bowl, you quickly discover that your expectations were set higher than the monk's hopes for a good harvest. This brownish slop is served warm, but it could probably mistake itself for the muddy puddles along the path to the chapel. Is this oatmeal, you silently ask yourself, while inwardly praying that God blesses your bowl of mystery mush? In reality, it's more like a wild experiment gone awry, an amalgamation of whatever grains were left over after the beetles have received their share of the sack's spoils. No culinary school prepared you for this. And as the performance drags on, you watch the older monks carefully extract chunks of floaters, possibly last Sunday's bread, from the murky depths of their own porridge. Is it a clump of protein or actual mould? The debate rages within your mind as you weigh the necessary risk of opting for that last spoonful on your consciousness over breakfast. Now is not the time for hygiene concerns. Each mouthful becomes a leap of faith that would make Indiana Jones reconsider his professional choices. If I chew fast enough, surely the discomfort will vanish, you whisper to yourself, hoping not to wake the wizened monk next to you, who seems far too invested in his own half-empty bowl. Before you can finish contemplating the possibility of running in horror, it's time for the pièce de résistance, the bread. This isn't the fresh-baked loaf you might imagine. This is steadfast and stout, hardened into a shape that could easily withstand a siege. You're more likely to engage in a duel than slice it. Your knife simply bounces off, creating an awkward exchange that draws attention from all corners of the refectory. And forget crusty edges. This bread is so dense it would happily double as a medieval projectile. Should you ever find yourself in a food fight, there's no possibility of losing with this weapon at the ready. You begin to wonder if you've somehow landed a role in a survival reality show, with the most monotonous cast imaginable, forced to endure breakfast challenges that range from bland to borderline bizarre. The younger monks chat quietly amongst themselves. Some are calculating if it would be socially acceptable to hope the next meal has fewer insects, or at least a tad less suspicion of being past its prime. Meanwhile, you're just grateful there's still a semblance of life left within these stone walls, even if it comes at the price of breakfast. So here you are, locked in this mealtime circus, hoping that tomorrow holds a smidgen of culinary adventure beyond your current breakfast experience. But as the bowl empties and the final beetle bids you adieu, you cling to the hope that perhaps, just maybe, they'll be serving potatoes or a nice cabbage patch stew next week. A mere monk can dream, can't he? As you rise, you leave the refectory feeling less like a courageous diner and more like an unwilling contestant who just barely survived today's gastronomic gauntlet. Who knows? At this rate, maybe a bumblebee will become your new roommate after all. Feel free to let me know when you'd like to continue with the next segment, or if you have any adjustments to request. Now that your stomach is flatter than the bread served at dinner, it's time for labour. Forget about cushy desks and air conditioning. This is hard work. You might be reliving the Groundhog Day of farming, copying texts, or scraping grease off ancient manuscripts with a stick. All this for a daily ration of bread that could probably be used to patch a roof instead of being eaten. Muscles. Let's just say you'll be feeling like a medieval hunchback by week's end. As dawn breaks, you roll out of your makeshift bed, if you can even call it that, your body creaking like an old barn door. Time to tend to the fields. Strap on your wooden sandals, if they still fit, and head out into the world, full of hopes to actually find something green among the boiled cabbage remnants of yesterday. Sure, the sun might look inviting, but let's face it, it's about to beat down on you worse than your elders did during sibling rivalries. Your job as a monk, if you're lucky enough to not be stuck scraping the soot from the fire, is the noble art of farming. Armed with nothing but a hoe that's probably older than you stagger through the fields that are less fertile land and more place where weeds go to multiply. You might think the hardest part is digging in the hard soil, but no, the toughest ordeal is avoiding your neighbour's goats that have taken an embarrassing liking to your tunic. Why is it always your tunic that they choose as their personal snack? You'll be questioning your laundry choices until the next full moon. When you finally return to the monastery, your face dusted with the soil, part of a dubious beauty routine you no longer care to refute, you're greeted by an indifferent bell-tolling dinner time. That's right. Now it's time to prepare for the luxurious experience of sharing a table with 100 other monks. Don't expect to discuss last week's sheep fleecing in polite terms. No, instead, conversations rotate around who failed miserably in their gardening efforts, and why last Sunday's hymn sounded like a herd of distressed cats. After filling your belly with a questionable stew that might resemble yesterday's mulch, more than any actual food, it's time for the other chores, if it could only be that easy. Next up is monastic scribing. That's right, you're to become the proud copyist of texts written in Latin, a language not even the rats in the attic are fluent in. With little more than your faith and a quill that seems more interested in inventing a new way to create ink stains on your trembling fingers, you hunch over manuscripts that feel like they've been transcribed by sleepless raccoons. Hours meld into each other as you silently mutter a few choice words that would surely send your scribe forefather reeling. Who cares about perfect penmanship when your back screams at you that perhaps being a monk isn't all it's cracked up to be? It's not uncommon to find yourself daydreaming about a cosy tavern where bread means actual loaves, and your ale is served in generous mugs instead of smudged bowls. After interminable hours of writing, it's time for an unexpected break. All of a sudden, you hear the rustle of plans tastier than your last meal. Wait, is that cheese? No, it's the local lord arriving with what might possibly be a gift of freshly baked bread to earlier visitors who brought tidings of generosity. Flooding your senses is the smell of something divine, which will soon be replaced with the reality of another miserable dish in the monastery stew. Sigh. As you continue the daily grind, thoughts of boredom intertwine with your aching muscles. Surely there must be something more to life as a monk than thinning the grains and writing soppy labels under the dried tomatoes hanging in your pantry. Just as you convince yourself that life inside these walls is as good as it gets, the bell tolls again. It's time for evening prayers, another chance to commune with divinity and to stick with the monotony of the group chant. Because who doesn't want that? Exhausted yet invigorated by the sheer act of surviving this day, you might just pay a quiet homage to the past life you'll never have. Everything has its ups and downs, and you can certainly confirm that today falls heavily on one side. As you find yourself laying your head back down on that comforting pile of hay, take a moment to embrace the irony. Tomorrow is just going to be another Groundhog Day of reason, with the beatings, routine, and the same discussions about goat-eating habits. But hey, at least you got a taste of that mediocre stew, right? Ah yes, the time for prayer. A soothing luxury if you're into chants that could curdle milk. The monks around you are so dedicated that some even sleep through their prayers, mouth agape. It's a mesmerising show where words echo like the sound of a cat screeching at 3 a.m. You might even find yourself drifting off. Let's be honest, singing would still sound better than your solo rendition of I Can't Get No Sleep. As you sit cross-legged on the stone floor trying to focus, you can't help but be distracted by the distinct aroma of aging hemp and the lingering stench of last week's cabbage stew. It's a scent so uniquely medieval that you half expect it to take on a life of its own and join the prayer circle. The service begins with a deep booming voice, probably the abbot, who seems to have taken sermon as a personal challenge to see how grim he can make the next hour sound. You can practically hear the walls around you shuddering in sympathy. The great wooden beams creak as if protesting against the very tone that blankets the room. You stifle a giggle, picturing the church itself being suffocated by the weight of these sombre hymns. Meanwhile, the relatively young monk to your right accidentally jerks awake and reaches for a nearby candle like it's a snack, mumbling Amen in what could very plausibly be classified as a mating call. This ritual gathering is less a moment of enlightenment and more an extensive workout for all things existential. Let's face it, the early morning chants lack the energy of a modern-day rock concert. No one's crowd surfing or throwing holy water around, and it's definitely without the electric chaos of any good pop music festival. Instead, your fellow monks harmonise like an army of grumpy frogs. If someone could harness that energy into a new energy source, you'd be rich enough to bribe a rich baron for bread. As you focus your attention, you sometimes feel that this might actually lift some of that dumpy feeling settling under your ribcage. Picture it, a collective voice attempting to ascend to heavenly realms, while you try to figure out what to do with a sharp itch developing in your walls. It's truly a mental gymnastics session. Every note is like a leap of faith, but with an underlying fear that if you get it wrong, you'll tumble right out of the monastery and straight into despair. To survive, you might need to incorporate a request for divine intervention into your prayers, just to keep your mind from wandering about how lovely a slice of apple pie would taste right now. Miraculously, the monks manage to stay on task, their voices rising to pitchy crescendos as you gaze up to find the grand stained glass windows absorbing all the hopes of the past 1,000 years. A kind of wall mural that appears to be mocking you. Seriously, who thought using stained glass was a good idea? Their combined glories make you wish your own vision of glory could become something more inspiring than a well-worn straw mat. One monk takes a particularly high note, and it's immediately echoed by the old bells that ring at the stroke of the hour, as if to announce this marvellously melodramatic fail. The vibration buzzes through your bones, awakening all the unsettling thoughts lingering in the crevices of your mind. Is this what it's like to reach nirvana? Or just the clear sound of regret for yesterday's fish stew? As the monks chant away, their faces are painted with a result that looks perilously close to either bliss or indigestion. About halfway through the sermon, you're convinced that they're maybe just performing a well-rehearsed ritual meant to hypnotize the entire assembly into communion with infinite boredom. You catch sight of a small spider lounging in the corner, contemplating the existential dread of its own life, while you aspire only to avoid further narrowing of your spine. The grand finale of this prayerful symphony arrives. Everyone clutches his hands in prayer while you casually hope nobody calls on you to lead the next round. A prospect that sends your heart racing like a mad hare. Suddenly, you find yourself racing through the numbers of which fruits and vegetables were not entirely overripe last week, while conjuring up the faint taste of ale on your tongue. The moment you peel your gaze away from the echoes of prayer, you realise maybe you should just accept that one prayer for this would involve reruns of your own deep musings, preferably moving towards something a fraction more fun. Just as the chanting winds down, and the final plea for salvation lingers in the air, the abbot finishes with a voice that booms louder than any bell. And now to work! The reality smacks you in the face like a wet turnip. You've survived the prayer, but heaven help you on the other side. There's more launder mattresses to endure, mysterious meals to chew on, and perhaps confrontational discussions about the weekly barley harvest are up ahead. Time to join your fellow monks in the grind of life, full of woe, joy, and perhaps the occasional spider to keep things interesting. At this point, nature is calling, and let's just say it's less of a polite invitation and more of an emergency signal. You've got to navigate the outdoor latrine sign, a wooden structure that screams "sit here if you dare," and truly defines what European alfresco really means. Forget toilet paper. Here, fashioning a leaf into something resembling a cleaning tool is more than a feat of skill. It's a rite of passage. Trying to find a spot that doesn't require a leap of faith so you can lower yourself onto a splinter-filled seat is all part of the experience. You glance around to see if your dignity will be spared, but the truth is, even a passing goat will have better manners than your fellow monks when it comes to privacy. Settling down on this rickety throne, and yes, you can almost hear it protest beneath your weight, is perhaps the most shared experience among your peers. There's no door, no curtain, and definitely no personal bubble. You may think you'll go about your business in peace, but the reality is you may as well be in a spectator sport. If you hear someone approaching, You can practically sense the impending judgment as your medieval companions gather with curious disbelief near the door, because who doesn't want to hear a good call of nature story during prayers? Now picture this. You brace yourself against the cold wood, going through the philosophical debate of whether you should just hold it until you die or push through. Spoiler, most people choose the latter, and once you finally go, you're faced with the ultimate betrayal. Did you really just see that mouse peek up from behind the pile of dirty hay, as if it were auditioning for the latest rendition of Survivor Medieval Edition? You realise there might be more terror here than in the mysterious porridge you ingested earlier. And here comes the kicker. When you're done with your business, you're not on your way to wash your hands with soap made from dreamy lavender and chamomile. Instead, you take a breath and do the medieval equivalent of a victory lap. You've earned the right to toss your contribution out the window. A round of applause, if you will, for the fine art of being a decent medieval citizen. And be sure to holler Gardeloo before executing your successful throw, unless you'd enjoy someone's choice urban dodgeball demonstration featuring human refuse. Out in the street, don't be surprised when it becomes a less than charming game of watch where you step. The joy of outdoor plumbing is that your street is more like a lovely river of filth, mixed with all the delightful aromas that come from the local livestock. It's a culinary hazard and an urban planning nightmare all rolled into one. So while you're standing next to your neighbour, proudly reflecting on your morning duties, while swatting flies and dodging unidentifiable liquids, the reality is you may yearn for a modern-day bathroom like it's the Holy Grail. But even that's not the end of your struggles, because while you might think your trip to the throne is the pinnacle of embarrassment, brace yourself for the grand finale. Cleaning up. You'll have to find a leaf. The dreaded search begins. You're left wondering if this will end poorly for you, or if you'll end up with a sticky leaf emergency that becomes your medieval version of toilet humour. And just when you think you've strategically grabbed the right one, you encounter the biting reality. You'll be cleaning up with whatever nature has provided, so here's to winning at least half of a game. And in the unfortunate event that you discover after the fact that you've chosen the wrong leaf, with an unfortunate texture or less than pleasant aroma, well, that's just the cherry on top of your lovely monastery life. You suddenly find yourself pondering, would anyone truly question why you haven't appeared for prayer yet? Or should you just blame it on a chronic case of artistic inspiration? So there you are, back at ground zero, your face smeared with the remnants of a somewhat unfortunate brush with nature. Perhaps you'll find another soul who's struggling, but it also might be the start of daily enlightenment, realizing that if the monk survived on mere scraps of food and unending chores, you can certainly survive the not-so-grand public latrine experience. Because in the grander scheme, what is life if not a shared toilet experience with a side of humility, and a powerful reminder that perhaps being human means traversing the swampy terrain of reality, one humble leaf at a time. Dress yourself akin to a rainy day disaster. Throw on the equivalent of a burlap sack and hope nobody questions your questionable fashion choices. Your monk's robes are designed by someone who decided insulation and cleanliness were for the wealthy. And as for embellishments or patterns, sorry, those are simply out of style when your biggest accessory is a cloud of irritating bugs. Yes, you find yourself clad in a robe made from wool that feels like it's scratching every inch of your skin. Like wearing a sheep that forgot about personal hygiene issues. Imagine tossing on this fashion statement with zero expectations for comfort. The sleeves are far too long, draping over your fingers like you just borrowed a wizard's wardrobe. With each movement, the robe clings to you like a clingy relative at a family reunion, only it smells worse than Uncle Gerald's last fish fry. As you shuffle about the monastery, trying to maintain a shred of dignity, you realise that wearing these robes is like embracing a walking laundry basket. inevitably tangled, perpetually damp, and always needing a good airing out, in the least flattering sense possible. Now let's address the spiritual aspect of choice in your daily attire. Monks live by the motto, "Clothe yourselves in humility." It's not just fashion advice, it's supposed to be a guiding principle, which conveniently translates to, wear something that makes you feel like you've been working the fields for 9 straight days. As you don the traditional monk's tunic, rich in some quality known as ugliness, just remember, you're one step closer to enlightenment. Or at least as close as you can get while resembling a potato sack with a face. And what about accessories? Perhaps a flashy belt or a habit that could catch the eye of a passing noble. Nope. The only belts you'll find here are cinctures that look suspiciously like discarded ropes, cinched so tightly that you question if you're about to enter a medieval taffy-pulling contest. If you attempt any kind of flair, your fellow monks will assure you, with mischief in their eyes, that piety involves complete dedication to the art of drab. Who knew stepping out in your best had such steep penalties? Forget personal flair. It's all about fitting in with a community that prides itself on looking as bleak as the weather. Then there's the matter of footwear. You might think a solid pair of shoes stands between you and another romantic encounter. Wrong again. You've got what can best be described as floppy sandals, handcrafted by someone who evidently lost a bet with a goat. They offer no support and definitely no protection against the cold stone floors, which you stumble on repeatedly, cursing the cobblestones that seem to magically move just to trip you. By the end of the week, your feet are sore and blistered. Perfect reminders of your fashion faux pas, as if you needed more. Also noteworthy is the ever-present threat of vermin. Don't look now. Those tiny, biting bugs have claimed your robes as their new favourite hangout spot. Look closely, and you might just spot one peeking its head from the folds of your garment. It's like they're throwing a continuous rave atop your shoulder, right in the middle of your meditation. Who knew enlightenment had its own brand of insects? But wait. If you've survived the nightmares of fashion faux pas, then you must navigate the all-important washing schedule, or lack thereof. When was the last time you experienced the joy of cleaning? Spoiler alert, it was probably never. The notion of washing garments is legendary here. Some monks sport stains so historic they could probably be catalogued in ancient texts. Most garments age at a rate that suggests they've dodged the washing tub like the bubonic plague. Eventually you'll come to understand that acquiring a fresh robe or two just isn't in the Abbey's budget, unless you qualify as the Lord's most favoured receptionist. So here you are, wobbling through monastic life, dressed in layers you'd never wish upon your worst enemy. Every rustle of fabric reminds you that your hopes for fashion-forward thinking died centuries ago. You breathe deeply and muster the humility to accept that, in this place, you're less of a ragamuffin and more of a reflection of God's approved frugality, one odd-shaped robe at a time. Who needs Vogue when you've got a daily dress code that inspires existential contemplation about the meaning of life, fabric choice, and maybe, just maybe, a little divine intervention in your wardrobe someday? Welcome to the medieval monastery, where every day is a mix of fashion fear and frugal fortitude, helping you discover the unshakable truth. The best adornment is the wisdom you wear through the experience of enduring this daily struggle. Bathing? Ha! Why cleanse dirt when you can actively live in it? Given all the health risks, monks often opted to forgo the bath and let their natural oils shine through, so basically you're wearing last week's grime like a Medal of Honour. The idea of water actually touching your skin could only occur when someone decided it was so dirty it might actually sprout legs. Let's be honest, in a time when cleanliness was considered a gateway to catching every disease known to God, monks took pride in their filth, claiming it as divine protection. Forget soap. The preferred method was to just let nature do its thing, which, let's face it, was usually just plotting to give them a rash. Now, if you were feeling unusually daring, you might stumble upon the concept of a communal bath. Kind of like a spa day, but totally devoid of luxury and all the things we do in private. Picture this: a wooden tub filled with water, heated over smouldering embers, shared with monks who probably hadn't groomed since the last full moon. The result? A glorious concoction of sweat, forgotten prayers, and the collective scent of desperation. You'd imagine it would be a serene experience, much like a yoga retreat, but nah, it's closer to a wrestling match with your fellow monks over who gets to scrub with the remaining soap, which is essentially just a smoothed stone. And then you have to consider how water itself is a bit of a paradox. It can bless crops and create the most divine-looking saints, but it's also a breeding ground for various unspeakable horrors. One sip from the well might mean instant illness. You couldn't just douse yourself in that risky water, could you? So, a quick dip seems less appealing when all that awaits you is a possible date with the village doctor, who likely has a very low success rate and an even lower concern for your dignity. No thanks. Let's not forget washing your hair amidst a horde of fellow monks praying for divine intervention isn't exactly a spa day either. Would you prefer the ceremonial chanting or wrestling with lice? Monks had mastered the art of silent suffering, rocking and unkempt, dew that could double as a nesting ground for small birds. So if your hair's texture resembled a wheat field, congratulations. You were considered a style icon in your own right, and no one was bold enough to suggest you may want to rethink your approach to hygiene. As you navigate through this overwhelmingly aromatic culture of medieval cleanliness, the very idea of self-care becomes a humorous joke. Horseflies buzz around during the great scrubbing because mosquitoes understand that rocking the filth is a full-time job. The entire act of washing becomes an event where you might need to chant your psalms just to drown out the noises of squatters covering their astonishment in the next room. Any hopefuls dreaming of running naked through lush fields of daisies are misguided, for here, the only nudity leads to shameful lapses in communal dignity. Bathing is a ritual only reserved for special occasions, like feast days, when it would finally be socially acceptable to look presentable. Every time you pass by the rivers, it's as if the water itself is mocking your poor decision to stay dirty. You can practically hear it whispering, "I've been waiting for you, but your last shower is still in medieval construction." By the end of the day, the whole charade leaves you feeling like the last surviving critter on an unsanitary island, unmatched yet utterly Georgian. So, you hastily don your scented garb, made old-fashioned by grime, and venture forth once more into the chaotic world. The beauty of it all: you can blame your foul odour on pilot errors in washing, because who are you really without a touch of mythology wrapped in muck? And as you lay your head down atop the dust-ridden pillow made from last week's potatoes, or lack thereof, you'll find solace in the idea that your scent could very well be the secret weapon to fend off evil spirits. What's more spiritual than a groaning group of your brothers remaining desperately filthy? If you squint hard enough and ignore the rancid aroma, you might convince yourself that moving to this level of self-neglect is, in fact, the highest form of self-acceptance. After all, in a world where health regulations mean next to nothing, your layers of dirt become a badge of honour, verifying your commitment to the monastic life. Bath. What bath? So, say goodbye to traditional hygiene practices, where a good scrub down could be as liberating as emancipation. Embrace the chaos, because in the realm of monks, less truly is more. Even if more means residing in a haze of unspeakable smells for the entirety of your life. And sleep tight, knowing that you survived another day entangled in robes, left to wrestle with thoughts of laundry and the next great monastic feast. Foraging for food is about as well planned as a game of dodgeball on a snow-covered hill. Chaotic. You've got to be quick about snatching up any morsel of food, or you could end up with 3 peas and a glorified piece of stale bread for a week. If you're really fortunate, perhaps a faint whiff of meat might dance by your nose, luring you into fantasies of gourmet dining. Not that it ever actually appeared on your plate. Instead, you're left with piles of gruel. And the most exciting thing on the menu is a steaming bowl of doubt mixed with disappointment. A delightful pottage made from whatever sad remains of last week's crops are still clinging to life. Each morning, the bell tolls, and breakfast is a shared event where you collectively lament your fate as you settle down for your communal feast. The good news, you're not alone. The bad news, you're surrounded by a crew of fellow monks who philosophically debate who gets the last hunk of bread, as if selecting their next possible saintly endeavour. As each of you dives into your respective bowls, there's no real eating here. It's more of a contest of endurance. Relish the texture that can only be described as on the borderline of gelatinous despair. Attempting to make the best of the situation, you might sprinkle some wild herbs into the mix. This improvisation can turn a bowl of liquid sadness into a slightly more aromatic broth. Alas, your fellow monks have other ideas. Squeezing in the only sprouted garlic bulb you've ever seen, leading to a revolt that would make a peasant's uprising look like a tea party. Someone yells, "Dare you sully our flavour with garlic's forbidden stench?" And there you thought you were being avant-garde. After breakfast, the thought of elevenses is, of course, just a dream in this existence. Your next potential break, the midday meal, is an event scheduled not too long after the buzz around whether Brother Harold's goat will finally produce some milk today. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. When lunchtime rolls around, you gather around a rickety table with high hopes, but are met with the practical reality of pottage again. This time, however, it's been left to simmer and ferment for about a week. That might be a slight exaggeration, but let's be real. The concept of a best before date simply has no place in monastic cuisine. Though you think about spicing things up, you must remember, unless you've been living the high life with your fancy new collection of non-existent spices, the most exotic flavour you'll encounter today will be mud from yesterday's foot track. All 12 monks need shoes, not exotic rubs. You're stuck with whatever was cooked up that morning, and if you're particularly adventurous, it might still have a few fly legs swimming in it. At least they're seasoned, you tell yourself. Somehow, miraculously, word gets out that feast days sometimes yield something resembling a celebration. You cross your fingers, digging deep for the hope that maybe today you will engage in a hope-filled culinary miracle. As luck would have it, crop failure has ensured the kitchen prep is as bare as your aspirations post-breakfast. Feast days will have to wait. Today, you can enjoy the delightful crunch of dried herbs while praying that your belly doesn't sound louder than Brother Thomas's sermons. So post-pottage, you settle into a post-lunch stupor, perhaps fishing in your pockets for days-old breadcrumbs or a spot of cheese. What's that? Cheese! Ah, a luxury one can only dream about if you're still waking up in this medieval monastery. Perhaps Brother Edgar still has some hidden away from that time he visited the nearby market. But let's be real, he's not going to share, and why would he? The only pair of boots he ever owned are more valuable than the meals he has missed. Then, as the day winds down, it occurs to you that while the feast of hearty meals is merely a myth, the one dependable snack you have is your fellow monks' admiration for the envy-inducing grain they just received. In this raucous retreat, everyone's eyes into their bowls of disappointment spark profound reflections on the deeper meaning of existence, leading you to contemplate if your calling might be more suited to that of a hermit escaping these dreadful servings. You ponder, will tonight finally bring some real food from beyond the walls, or are you destined to make peace with your steadfast famine? So the next time you think about the trials of dining in a comfortable modern setting, Remember the unsung monk sitting silently in contemplation, spoon in one hand and dreams of edible fantasy in the other. One can only hope he isn't still waiting for a proper meal. What's a day in a monastery without a little meditation? Sure, you might have signed up for some inner peace, but the real test is not falling asleep while attempting to reach nirvana. With nothing but silence and the occasional flute playing like a drunk rabbit, you may find yourself questioning if enlightenment is just code for stay awake through this. You settle down on the hard stone floor, knees protesting like a disgruntled goat, and prepare for what you hope will be a tranquil experience. Spoiler alert, it probably won't be. The first minute is, of course, glorious. You anticipate divine wisdom flooding your being like a refreshing wave at a beach, only to be interrupted by the alarming scratch of a flea flinging itself across your leg, making a beeline for unknown territories. Are you officially one with the world, or just one with these miniature jumpers? These little critters are the unwelcome guests in your meditative retreat, reminding you that in a monastery peace doesn't come without a price. Yet you puff out your chest and commit to channeling your inner monk, however disgustingly itchy that may be. As you attempt to settle your thoughts, was it your turn to scrape the latrines this week? Does bread really count as a complete meal? The atmosphere around you thickens. Silence transforms into a bizarre symphony of buzzing insects, an untrained choir of frogs croaking nearby, and the distant echoes of someone arguing passionately about the age-old question, how to best prepare cabbage for dinner. Yes, enlightenment seems attainable, but the odorous presence of someone cooking cabbage in the background makes that goal feel more elusive than catching a wild hare. Delving deeper into your meditation, you might even begin to fantasize about brisk evenings outside, where you're savouring roasted meats by the fire instead of grasping at thin air while sitting on these cold stones. You can practically taste the meal inside your head, an aromatic stew of noble proportions, perhaps spiced with basil and love, instead of alms of hard-rooted despair. Alas, the smell of damp hay stirs up random thoughts, vanishing your ambition of higher consciousness like the last slice of bread at a feast. After what feels like an eternity, you squeeze your eyes shut, wishing for direct revelation from the heavens, only to hear a sudden explosive sneeze coming from Brother Eldritch across the room. This isn't just any sneeze, it's the kind that shakes the rafters and alarms the crows in the neighbouring fields. Breaching the sacred silence, it launches you back to reality like a catapult. You peek your eyes open to see Brother Eldritch fumbling to stifle yet another sneeze, looking like a woolly sheep attempting to communicate its opinions about the state of the harvest. Now, where was I, you mutter under your breath? Oh yes, inner peace. But what is inner peace if Brother Eldritch is auditioning for the role of the world's loudest crow? Suddenly you're filled with curiosity. Is this what it means to seek enlightenment, gnawing on fleeting moments of chaos while dodging dangerously oversized insects? Deciding that total tranquility isn't in the cards today, you embrace the madness of your environment. Maybe, just maybe, the monks aren't grasping at serenity either. Perhaps they too are just trying to suppress the giggles at each interruption. Silence here is simply a wink toward awkwardness amidst chaos, and who wouldn't chuckle at the absurdity of it all? And then there's the actual meditation mantra, a thrilling phrase the monks might chant. Instead of the profound words of wisdom you read about in scrolls, you catch snippets of embrace the cabbage. It's not just a meal, it's a lifestyle, reminding you that possibly the ultimate goal isn't even enlightenment. Maybe it's just surviving another day of unconventional communal living, where every pebble underfoot leads to laughter or a minor existential crisis. Finally, as the lead monk starts wrapping up the meditation session, probably inspired by a rogue fly, buzzing right up his nostril, you realise something monumental. Surrounded by fools, cabbages and daily life chaos, you might not find nirvana today, but at least you found a good sense of humour, and isn't that the real achievement? Who cares about transcending the mundane when you can revel in the hilarity of it? After all, isn't that life in the monastery? It's chaotic, unwieldy, a flea-ridden comedy of errors where inner peace is merely a fleeting idea that often slips away like yesterday's porridge. So as you stretch and rise, ready to tackle whatever madness comes next, possibly a battle over who's destined to feed the pigs, you can't help but chuckle at the absurdity of seeking peace in a place designed for contemplation, or rather constant chaos. At least your next moment of reflection will come with a more realistic cast of characters, including cabbages, comforting imperfection, and fellow monks who might be just as lost as you in the search for blissful mediocrity. Now into the scriptorium, where you're tasked with copying, laboriously transcribing texts. You've never felt more strapped down to mediocrity. With ink that likely has a secret ingredient known only to ancient manuscripts, and a quill that might also double as a tiny spear, you'll labour through painstaking pages and still feel like you haven't moved an inch in a decade. The flickering candlelight does little to illuminate your task. Instead, it dances with the shadows, casting imposing outlines of looming monks and impressive stacks of parchments that seem to glow with mock enthusiasm. As you grip your quill, you wonder if you might be the latest casualty of medieval multitasking, suffering from RSI before the phrase had even been invented. Your fingers ache as if they've just pledged allegiance to the will of a particularly unforgiving blacksmith. But this is the life you've signed up for. After all, there's not much else happening in the monastery, aside from the occasional round of medieval bingo, also known as Guess Who's Sick Today. With each stroke of the pen, your heart sinks deeper. The text you're copying drips with as much enthusiasm as leftover gruel. Phrases like, "In the beginning, there was light," echo in your mind, and you secretly wonder if light was decidedly more interesting than this endless embellishment of psalms and prayers. You scoff at the thought. Where's the fun in scripture, really? Is there a hot gossip column in this manuscript somewhere about the monk who accidentally confessed his love for the abbey cat? It doesn't take long before your mind wanders further down this rabbit hole. What happens if you accidentally scribble a goat riding a sheep instead of whatever saintly proclamation you're supposed to be faithfully transcribing? Sure, Father Bartholomew could be a stickler about integrity, but wouldn't it add a bit of flair? Images of the monks gasping in horror at your artistry dance before your eyes. Ah, but doodling does get mighty risky when even a scribbling error can lead to being branded as the sinful architect of a foolish goat's tale. The scriptorium is surprisingly devoid of drama, every nearby monk digging steadily, more focused on their own awful task than gossiping about your misdeeds. This form of monkish concentration is admirable, if only they could concentrate as well on avoiding the flies buzzing around, who seem utterly convinced your pile of unfinished manuscripts is a 5-star buffet. You witness this whole scene step by step, as most monks absently swat away the airborne nuisances, while others remain so absorbed that they might as well have pledged themselves to the flies in a strange monastic marriage of mutual inconvenience. Your scratchy quill brings you to thoughts of what those scriptures might say were scribed by a monk who spent his weeks doped up on the finest ale, instead of water that tastes like stagnant bog. And, lo, the lamb was delicious and hearty, and the ale was plentiful. Now that's a passage that might have people gathering for worship without a grave tendency to dose off in the candle's dim twilight. Of course, you know the truth. The real danger lurking in your script is the plague, that dreaded spectre that already has half your fellow monks shaking in their sandals and creating brooding poetry about their imminent demise. Every cough from a neighbouring table sends warning signals shooting straight through your bones. Could it be just barley in their ale? Or have the disease-carrying rats begun holding court in the pantry again? You glance nervously at the strange marks left by tiny claws on the edges of certain scrolls. Are they signatures? Or a warning from the underworld? Perish the thought. The abbot's stern face suddenly appears before you, eyes narrowed and heart heavy with scholarly judgment. He inspects your work like a hawk preparing for a swift plunge. But the moment he presses his nose too close to the parchment, the scent of what must be the world's oldest cheese rises up, a warning sign that could rival any medieval alarm bell. Sure, it's an emperor's decree of a rather cursed sort, yet in this moment all you can do is stifle a chuckle as he backs away, undoubtedly shamed into reconsidering even a close peer into your work. As the hours drag on, you find your heart racing with the realization. Mundane life in the scriptorium might be your hell on earth, but at least it's never dull. Hence, with every stroke of the quill and every speculative glance at your conditions, you silently vow to become a champion of scribes, a defender of the written word and the decidedly awkward artwork brought to life on these fragile pages. So, who knows? Maybe one day someone will cough up a narrative worthy of a splendid goat and sheep partnership, entered into the history books, or at least the culinary annals of your quaint little monastery. Not that you're an artist, but every once in a while they might let you dabble with paints meant for illustrations. There's a lot of pressure when the biggest art critic in the room is also the head monk, who's unafraid to scold your artistic efforts. Why is that saint squinting? Avoids the question of why your main character looks suspiciously like a potato. Welcome to the vibrant world of monastic art, where every brushstroke feels like a high-wire act performed without a net, and where your greatest fears are realised in a haphazard blending of colours that may or may not resemble the image drawn in your head. Picture this scene. You're surrounded by stacks of yellowed parchment, some of which haven't seen the light of day since the age of cross-eyed kittens. You dip a brush into a dish of pigments painstakingly squeezed from what may or may not have been a recently deceased beetle, or worse, the remnants of last week's breakfast. What called for divine inspiration soon devolves into a farce as you pour misguided zeal into creating an eye-catching rendition of the Gospels. After all, they didn't call it illuminated, just because they were being kind. You want your work to light up the hearts of the congregation while merely illuminating the fact that your artistic abilities were last validated under the dubious scrutiny of a scarecrow. As you fumble with colours that only seem to exist when placed beside the bleed of your regrets, the other monks walk by, hovering like hawks overhead, ready to critique your miraculous monstrosity. Each one silently judging you, as you pray to the heavens that your artistic efforts do not lead to being sent back to the fields, or worse, assigned a permanent role as the monastery's resident janitor. The wayward glances say it all. You're but a few brush strokes away from eternal shame, or possibly eternal servitude, which doesn't sound that different in the long run. And what about the inspirations? When an artistic rant can mean a painted papyrus flowing with the kind of visions only dreams or bad barley could conjure, you begin to long for the days of simple clay figures that at least didn't call for conscientious interpretations. You've always found that mortals in robes do not take kindly to squirrels wearing crowns or deeply emotional potatoes being sent off to conquer kingdoms. Drawing from centuries-old biblical tales, you bravely recreate scenes to share the divine narratives. They must be worthy, lest your artistic renderings become but a crazy legend told over gurgling ale in the refectory. But here's the fatal flaw in trying to capture religious history, alongside your feeble attempts to keep from sneezing on the paint. You know absolutely nothing about shadowing, light sources, or even hands that look human. Instead, you're left with characters who appear to have emerged from a questionable circus act. How on earth did you get those mountains to look like? Mashed peas, demands the senior monk with a piercing glare, feigning interest while really judging the artwork as if it were a heretical text. Oh, nothing says great artisan like mountains modelled on the closest thing to British cuisine. You've turned the sacred vision of grace into a landscape of culinary critique, one whose stares make it painfully clear that a crow could have painted those rocks better. Nevertheless, you press on, scrambling to turn piety into palette, producing what can only be described as artistic trauma. You can practically hear your classmates from long ago, all of whom are likely off carving masterpieces in far more successful careers, chuckling at your excellence, or lack thereof, as they live out their lives in bright ballrooms instead of ill-lit corners scavenging through thickening paint and reciting prayers, hoping divine inspiration strikes like a lightning bolt of good fortune. Eventually the day concludes, and the head monk, armed with a damp rag and a barely concealed sigh, wipes down your latest attempts at creativity. Somewhere between the scrubbing and cursing, you find solace in the knowledge that even masterpieces were once just a vague idea shaped by failing hands. Perhaps with enough practice you could rise above the potato comparisons and achieve something gloriously unpraiseworthy in the eyes of the high art, while still managing not to evoke the wrath of those around you, perhaps something resembling a truly divine blunder. As you pack away the colours, crumpled gaiters, and the unmistakable scent of despair that clings to your very soul, you realise that creativity, much like monastic life, is about community, resilience, and loving what may not be worth praising at all. It's a commitment to colour, food, and maybe just a dash of chaos. All for the kind of masterpieces that inspire and amuse, even if they never truly see the walls of the monastery. So apparently love for the divine comes at a price, a vow of celibacy. Your heart races for the woman you saw outside the monastery last week, and yet here you are, stuck in a silent ammonia-filled hall, cut off from any romantic possibilities and forced to contemplate whether "save your heart" is just an overly optimistic catchphrase. You think about her walking past in a sea of muddy peasants, hair flowing like a hymn, and oh, how you miss the sweetness of unsanctioned glances and awkward conversations. But now, those thoughts are as forbidden as a rogue carrot at the monastery table. As a monk, you're supposed to find meaning in the quiet contemplation of spiritual matters, but some moments are just relentlessly bleak. You spend your days working in the fields, chanting prayers, and doing your best to ignore the very real throbbing in your chest that resembles something resembling spring fever. Where is that delicate wisteria blooming, you sigh, clutching your heart like it could actually switch its allegiance to some divine prayer book? Seriously, is it too much to ask for a few moments with a simple wink or a flirty smile rather than endless spiritual obligations? Is celibacy truly what God intended, or is it a twisted form of cosmic punishment? You begin to suspect that the real test of faith should involve navigating your feelings while dodging a flock of wild ducks in the cloister garden. You notice your mates furtively whispering sweet nothings about a failed romance with their own unreturnable affections, each of you bonding over your mutual heartache. If there's anything more awkward than contemplating holiness while longing for love, it's doing so with a cheese wheel as your only confidant. Even the head monk, who seems perpetually stoic, must feel that tension somehow creeping into his papal robes. You chuckle quietly as you consider the church fathers who had no idea they were enforcing the world's least romantic movement. The irony begins to set in. "Save yourself," they shout, while you can't help but think, from what? My own thoughts? Sometimes you fantasize about escaping the walls, roaming the streets with wild shenanigans, stealing roses from the neighbouring farm, and professing love to every lass by the well. Clumsy charm be damned. And even with the divine promise of eternal happiness, those thoughts fade as quickly as they come. You sit in quiet contemplation, weighing your options. The heavy stone walls echo the sound of your hopeless heart, a cruel reminder of your devotion. To love is human, you hear the whispers of your heart, yet here you are, lurking like a vestige of light in a cemetery of silence. Let's not forget the countless things you'd give for a cosy fireside chat with that lusciously insightful woman. To discuss the latest harvest, share a laugh at the expense of Brother Bernard's surprise, fumble with a sack of oats, or even argue. Wouldn't that be delightful? It beats praying with a side of loneliness, doesn't it? But alas, love and laughter are luxuries as out of reach as a pint of syrupy ale on feast days. In your deep and troubling reveries, you even begin brainstorming potential lifestyle changes. What if you became the monastery's forbidden monk? Imagine stealthily crafting secret notes to her, arranging clandestine meetings in the shadow of the chapel, perhaps a stolen kiss or two, only to slip back into the stone walls before they realise you're gone. A romantic's game of hide and seek in heavy wool robes. Let's be honest here. You're more likely to trip into a barrel of pickled cabbage while trying to be stealthy than achieve silky moments of passion. Remember those good old days riding through the fields like a knight on horseback? The way your heart raced when you spotted someone you secretly admired. This celibacy business has turned you into a lovesick bard writing sonnets in your head that will never see the light of day. And while the days melt into one another, the beautiful woman lingering in your thoughts has become an image more brilliant than any painted fresco in the monastery. Every time the chapel bells ring, signalling yet another prayer to long-forgotten saints, your heart sinks just a bit lower, but all you can do is pray for guidance. Because love may not be on the agenda, but its ghost is an unavoidable companion, at least till supper rolls around. So here you are, bound by vows, yet your heart still flutters away like a wound-up toy getting a taste of freedom. If only you could express to the powers that be that celibacy really needs a rebranding, perhaps something like temporary detour to enlightenment. Maybe they'd consider adjusting their stances and let monks enjoy a little love while still finding faith. After all, even God must have liked to try a new dish every so often, right? So, until then, your heart will continue to wander in the silent shadows of the monastery, while your soul tries to reconcile with the fact that love truly is the original lockdown. A lockdown you might be ready to escape, one cabbage-stuffed heart at a time. Socializing with the other monks is akin to attending a very quiet graduate seminar on the unfriendly nature of the universe. Conversations tend to drift towards theological debate, the best hay for sleeping on, and the existential crisis that is monastic life. Definitely a real chit-chat around the supper table. You poke at your bowl of gruel, wondering if suffering this much while trying to converse is what the scriptures meant by spiritual discipline. As the evening wears on, those unwashed robes and earnest faces offer striking visuals of contemplative bliss, interrupted by awkward silences. The kind of silences you wish would prompt someone to pass the salt, only to realise salt hasn't been a luxury since the fall of Rome. Instead, someone's reciting a particularly dry excerpt about the virtues of obedience, and you valiantly attempt not to let your eyes glaze over. The monk who insists on dissecting every syllable of the holy book could easily win "it most likely to put you to sleep" award. A nagging itch in your back reminds you that there are indeed worse fates, like being stuck with Brother Aloysius, the self-appointed expert on how to harvest wheat during a thunderstorm. And let's not forget the tragicomic backdrop of communal living. You sit shoulder to shoulder in a dim hall, where the lingering scent of the previous month's cabbage soup still hangs in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. It wafts into every conversation, blending past gripes into a heady mix of despair and hunger. "Well, at least the soup is filling," says Brother William, struggling to ignore the flecks of something floating eerily close to the rim of his bowl. As you politely nod, you can't help but wonder which flavour of state of existence your soup is channeling today. Existential dread or mere sustenance. The monk's laughter, if you can call it that, sounds less like joy and more like the wheezy rasping of someone trying to resurrect a long-lost donkey. Why is it so hard to find humour in day-to-day failings? You'd think among so many aspiring saints, someone would crack a smile over the sheer absurdity of your daily experience. It's not like the errant goat has called upon the divine to discuss your lack of talent when it came to brewing ale. Instead, you find Alberto earnestly sharing his interpretation of the last 3 verses, and you can feel your enthusiasm hemorrhage like a cracked cistern. When silence reclaims the room, desperate for distraction, you glance toward the wooden beams adorned with a splatter of water stains and something resembling mould, wondering if a holier-than-thou creature has quite literally decided to take residence over your heads. The question is not whether it holds wisdom, but rather if it plans to impart its knowledge before your evening activities resume, if you dare venture into a game of what would St. Benedict do. While you compete for who can make the most profound joke, clearly nobody gets to laugh. After all, humour is a privilege reserved for those in the outside world. Do you ever think about what it would be like to swap your tunic for something with colours? A change of wardrobe would elicit a sparkling chat about papal fashion choices and end with promises of mutual camaraderie over just a cup of ale. Instead, here you stand, a stalwart monk with nothing to offer but thin smiles and forced chuckles, while the ever-dreaded thought of running out of cabbage creeps into your mind like an uninvited guest. It's the pinnacle of complex conversations while struggling against the baseline of meagre rations. And then, Brother Lucian chimes in again, eyes wide with fervour. Have you ever considered the essence of life as a continuous pilgrimage? You bite your tongue to suppress a chuckle, because let's be honest, this guy's perspective could use a little less metaphysical meditating and some grounded reality. You might dismiss his journey of the soul talk as rambling, yet there's an undeniable charm about how he weaves his points like a patchy tapestry, each loosely sewn thread focusing more on grand concepts than the drudgery of your typical meals. At last, the hour is late, and you begin to dissolve into the calm of giddy recollections, forming camaraderie from unravelling strands of mundane conversations. Embracing the absurdities of your shared existence becomes the thread that ties you all together. Fellow monks whose lives revolve around brown stew, questionable bathing practices, and the omnipresent spectre of impending doom if someone decides to dare question the air quality in the chapel. You lean back in your chair, surrendering to the laughter sparking at the edges of your mind, because deep down, maybe it's the communal chaos that reminds you that life, even through robes and rations, is filled with shared moments of hilarity. The great outdoors, a day out in the monastic garden. At least outside might offer some semblance of freedom. You wade through the fields only to find that fresh air has a different connotation when you uncover an unsupervised cart of cabbage sneaking at you from behind. Your gardening skills will inevitably be tested, working soil in a plot that nobody even knows if it produces real vegetables or just plans on growing weeds with aspirations of glory. The monks seem to believe that the act of kneeling in dirt while muttering to the heavens is enough to coax a miracle from the earth. You dig your hands into the earthy soil, feeling like you're one bad season away from a monk-narrated tragedy. It starts well enough. There's something satisfying about pulling weeds, assuming you can identify which of the sad little green sprouts are weeds at all. It's basically a game of guess the plant, and so far, The only winning strategy is to hope nobody asks what you're doing and why your back is rounding into the shape of a question mark. Is this really what the Bible meant when it talked about sowing seeds? Just when you're getting into a rhythm, a bewildering wave of aroma wafts through the monastery grounds. What could that be? You glance over your shoulder, half expecting a roast pig to be wandering past. Unfortunately, it's just Brother Leonard advancing on you with a pitchfork that's seen better days. Why is it that he always looks like he's one theological debate away from a breakdown? With a faraway stare, he mutters something about providing for the less fortunate. A concept that sounds lovely until you realise he's implying that means using your last cabbage for the week to make broth that might not even be edible. As you hunker down in the muck, preparing for what you presume is going to be a communal feast of cabbage slop, you hear the faint echoes of chanting coming from the monastery itself. It's not a blissful song of praise. It's the kind of droning that lulls you into questioning your life choices, including why you thought guzzling half-peck of the last ale was a good idea the night before. You can almost feel the ground vibrating beneath you, as the monks nonetheless channel their inner divinity, battling through the sprout-dotted earth for some transcendental connection with nature. If only they'd do the same at dinner. While you dig, your gut instinct tells you this garden is the closest you're getting to a spiritual experience. That, and a thirst for water that has likely been tainted by last week's rain, you can't ignore the urge to reflect. Is this what life has boiled down to? Spending days wrestling in the dirt and coming home smelling like a compost heap? Meanwhile, the neighbouring lord's estate is probably throwing a lavish feast with golden relics and imported spices. But no, here you are, knee-deep in the natural state of humanity. Still, it is the best excuse you have for giving yourself a break from monotonous prayers and repulsive porridge. As midday approaches, you attempt to invent ways to make this catastrophe slightly more enjoyable by nurturing the idea of becoming a master gardener. Maybe you can use this time outside to develop your own way of creating a fruitful vegetable patch. After all, isn't that what they say? If you plant it, they will come. If you manage to ensnare even a stray carrot or pea, you might achieve slightly elevated status among the evening feasts. You labour, back-breaking, sweat mingling with soil, dreaming of summers supposedly filled with plump tomatoes and a place in the monastery lore, a fable of the cleric who not only prayed but cultivated. But alas, the fantasy comes crashing down when your shovel hits something hard in the ground, the unmistakable thud of ancient stone. You unearth what seems to be a forgotten relic, perhaps the remains of a prior monk who met a fate tragically connected to poorly planted root vegetables. It's enough to send your thoughts racing. Perhaps this was the last unfortunate soul who thought he might start a beet garden to kick off his mini cultivation revolution, only to be struck down by calamity, or maybe just poor decision-making. As the sun begins to sink, the air grows cooler, wrapping you in the eerie ambience of the impending twilight. You glance around and realise the once abundant chatter of birds is now a haunting melody of silence, broken only by the sound of rustling leaves. It's as if the world knows you've concluded your dirt-filled foray and decided to mark it with the cinematic touch of nature's own drama. Maybe God himself is just waiting for you to finish digging before showering down a sign or two regarding your choices to embrace the earth rather than the monastery walls. So, as you trudge back to the sacred stone halls, knees caked in remnants of Mother Earth herself, and memories of your failed guardian angel aspirations clinging to you like a bad memory, you can't help but roll your eyes. Truly, knows the divine wonders of the universe are not found in harvesting cabbages, but in the relationships forged amid laughter, mud, and the faint hope, however tiny, that the next harvest will live up to its promises. Here's to dreaming, one cabbage at a time. Our nature, An unrelenting force that doesn't care if you've devoted your life to piety and potato peeling. From wild animals looking for a game of tag to daringly harsh weather that cannot forgive your choice of an open robe, embracing the outdoors leads to many a battle, both physical and psychological. As a monk, stepping outside your stone sanctuary means testing your mettle against whatever the heavens throw down, from pelting rain to oppressive heat, as if the sky itself wants to ensure you never see the sun, literally and metaphorically. Picture this. You open the door to your monastery, a streak of sunlight piercing through the clouds, and think, wow, today might actually be delightful. But if you've been in the order long enough, you know that's the moment the wind decides to hiss like a cat in a bad mood. Suddenly you're wrestling your robe, which has decided to mimic the behaviour of a rebellious kite. Just as you think you've constrained its billowy drapes, the sudden gust exposes your ankles, an act of unimaginable sacrilege in a world where modesty is next to godliness. As you stagger backward, the last sliver of dignity blown away, you can almost hear the chuckles of your fellow monks echoing from the warmth of the refectory. Then there's the wildlife, those fearless creatures that turn every excursion into a game of dodging danger. Wild boars rooting through the hedges, more like a furry tank on a collision course with your sanity. Do you stand your ground, armed only with your morbid curiosity and a fear of being airlifted for injuries caused by your pious diet? Or do you back away slowly, the far-flung whimpers of "Where's my vegetable soup?" echoing in your ears? Not one for traditional combat training, you may find yourself running away as if you were auditioning for a play titled Fighting Your Fears, an epic tale of retreat. And let's not forget about the bees! To exist as a monk in the medieval ages is to know that honey can sweeten your pittance of porridge, but the flip side is having a literal swarm buzzing around you. One flower too many, and you're tangled in a floral embrace with nature's winged defenders. You soon realise that your fear of them is rivaled only by your fear of being intercepted by an angry bee, which could lead to mocking notes written by unsupportive monks about your fearful nature. Consider also the weather, that mercurial entity which switches moods quicker than an angry peasant. In summertime, you're baked under the sun, sweat pooling in every conceivable nook and cranny of your robe. Good luck trying to maintain your composure while praying. Seriously, hitting those high notes in a hymn becomes nearly impossible when your concern lies in whether your armpits may start to sprout new life forms. Your meditative state is rudely interrupted by an insistent urge to rub against the nearest wall, as if attempting to shed layers of grime like a snake casting its skin. As winter rolls in, you realise that cozy is a myth. Armed with nothing but your love for the Lord and an ancient cloak that smells faintly of goat, you brace against the icy chill like it's auditioning for the role of your personal demon. Cold fingers awkwardly clutch your prayer beads, making you feel like you're casting a spell of improvised misfortune. Each prayer is accompanied by what sounds like a medieval keyboard malfunction, your frozen joints creaking like an ancient church door getting ready to moan about winter wonderlands. And what's worse, your natural surroundings can betray you too. Just when you think you've finally mastered the art of nature wrestling, your nearby river might suddenly morph into a raging beast after a storm. You could find yourself fending off rapids while futilely yelling, "Not today, nature," as your sandals become untrustworthy renegades, floating off down the basin like hope in a dystopian novel. So, after a long day of battling the elements, you collapse back on your straw bed. Exhausted, battling a variety of aches and pains, you ponder the meaning of this unholy monk nature dance you've been forced into. Shouldn't a life devoted to higher purpose come with a few perks? Perhaps they could instead serve snacks at the refectory that don't require you to provide your own bait to catch a meal. You realise the battles fought were not just against the fierce winds or opportunistic wildlife, but a test of will against a world indifferent to your quest for serenity. And that, dear listener, is the true nature of existence in a medieval monastery. It's a wild ride, and you've still got tomorrow to look forward to. Feeling under the weather in a monastery is less about catching a few sniffles and more about navigating the fine line between it's just a cold and experiencing the historic rite of passage that is an early grave. A cough or sneeze could easily lead to a monk-narrated play about the end of times, all while you sit there confused, contemplating the logistics behind that. In a time when medicine consists of wishful thinking and herbal teas from the most questionable plants, you quickly realise the need for damage control when sneezing in public. The moment you let out a cough, the brothers will turn to you with faces so stern they could scare a rat back into hiding. Just imagine it. In your fevered state, you're about to drown in medieval misery when Brother Timothy takes this opportunity to recite all the reasons you're likely to perish soon. Well, my friend, he'll say, if that cough is from the devil himself, we're certain it's his last warning for your wretched soul. Now, everyone knows it's just the dust from the hay again, which might be an even worse fate. You can practically feel the judgment in the air. Why cough when you can just feign death? If only your ailment stopped at the cough. The monks discuss remedies as though they're cooking up potions in an alchemical lab. One particularly ambitious member might suggest a remedy so vile it could double as a punishment in stocks. You must consume this congealed mudwort gathered by moonlight, boiled for 3 hours and whispered to by a rabbit, he might declare with fervour. Ah, yes, because nothing screams health like a sludge that looks more like a crime scene than a cure. So, you lie there, contemplating how far this cure might take you. Will it be the end of your misery, or will you simply transition from being sick in bed to being sick in a wooden coffin, rotting away while the monks pray you'll find the Lord in your next life? Seeing others take the concoction definitely adds layers of anxiety. Most seem less lively after that mysterious health potion far more than they did before. Is that what they mean by medieval health treatment? Yet you push through, convinced that if you tackle your own ailments head on, you're not just a warrior against the flu, you're a champion of survival. But not all disease comes from colds and coughs. There are plenty of medieval threats lurking round every haystack. Enter the ever-present risk of lice. Yes, those insidious little critters are akin to unyielding monks that have taken a vow of poverty, and frankly, they're thriving. Your first brush with them starts innocently enough, but quickly ends in scratching, fighting, and losing your freaking mind. You could make a case that having lice is punishment far worse than a cold. And here you are, a sick monk battling your hair while the rest await their turn in purgatory. Now let's talk about the famed bloodletting. You know, the medieval equivalent of hitting Ctrl plus, Alt plus delete on your health. When you're trying to convince Brother Joseph that you might need some actual medical help, he insists on the need to drain your life force, a process he's convinced will return you back to health. You start to wonder if there have been mistaken translations throughout history, and the actual motto of monastic life is to suffer and normalise the absurd. So, despite your better judgment, you'll find yourself being tied to a bench while a very enthusiastic brother bandages you up with fervour. It's for the sins, my son. All for the sins. As if lasering in on your physical ailments demonstrates a holier grail. Eventually you begin to realise that sickness in a monastery carries a normality of its own. Maybe the thought of dying might just push you to discover new realms of spirituality, or it could just mean you sputter out your last hopes in the company of mildly rotten cabbage. Who cares if you drift through straw and prayer through undetermined fog? It's a world of uncertainties, judgmental glances, and a lineup of cures that could have easily been fable tales of how not to handle a cold. So here you are, a sneezing wreck in a world fraught with illnesses, fainting spells, and awkward encounters with acolytes whose best health advice is to pray that the good Lord has a special place in his heart for you, one where your cough can go unnoticed. You might survive this cold, or you may face an audience with death in the most underwhelming way possible. Either way, you soldier on the path of monastic life with the knowledge that every sneeze could be the beginning of a legendary tale. Just don't expect standing ovations. When the local lord decides to pay you a visit, prepare yourself for awkward formalities over stale ale. These encounters are not just about inspections. They're often laden with awkward conversation about crops, and there is a heaviness in the air as if the very rafters are pressing down on your sanity. You feel like you might just be one sideways glance away from demanding a personal sacrifice. Nothing says welcome quite like the ever-looming threat of losing a goat or two, or worse, being asked to relinquish the honour of your family heirloom, a rusty frying pan, because his lordship fancies a new kind of omelette. As you nervously adjust your wool tunic, a garment so threadbare that you're convinced even the fleas have a collective underwhelming opinion about it, you brace yourself for the arrival of the Lord in all his pompous indignity. When he arrives, it's an event. He rolls in with more flair than a peacock at a fashion show, attended by a gaggle of soldiers whose swords gleam as if they've been polished with the sweat of serfs. The ground shakes beneath your feet, a not-so-subtle reminder that you're about to impress a man who only just thinks he's a god. Your hands tremble as you offer a stiff bow, a feat that could also double as an impromptu hip stretch if you're not careful. What's next? A buffet of conversational delights like, your crops seem present, and, is that a cow I see? No, it must be a goat, right? You nod, painfully aware that your lord has a title longer than your entire family tree, and probably knows less about farming than a blindfolded rabbit. But hey, he's got manners. While he absent-mindedly knocks back his 7th mug of that stale ale, an experience often more akin to rinsing your mouth out with liquid cardboard, you try hard to keep eye contact, not wanting to show weakness. But please, can someone help you find an actual personality in this conversation? The local lord is the kind of fellow who doesn't actually seem to hear your responses, likely preoccupied thinking of new ways to maintain his waistline while simultaneously contemplating taxes. And taxes, dear listener, are not just numbers pulled out of thin air. They are magic tricks performed by the lords to make your paycheck disappear faster than a chicken at a poorly attended buffet. Just when you begin to think you've escaped the conversation, the lord pivots to his next favourite topic, himself. The clever artistry of the court has never looked so extravagant, he declares. He might as well have boasted about his collection of toenail clippings. You can't even remember the last time you owned a mirror. The thought makes you reconsider the state of hygiene in this corner of heaven's dungeon. And as he launches into yet another saga about his most recent support role in a battle, during which you can't help but suspect that his only injury was a paper cut from the map involved, you find your thoughts wandering to the time your old neighbour almost set his own barn on fire while attempting to roast a pig. Now that was a story worth storytelling. Just when you think the conversation is about to lead you to blessed escape, the Lord claps his hands and announces, "Well, I must perform my duty as your noble figure and collect from you." Ah, the sweet sound of impending doom. The collection is not just your taxes, but also a heaping serving of your dignity, plated beautifully for his enjoyment. You might be willing to offer up those herbs you've been trying to keep alive, but when he glances toward your nearly non-existent livestock, you can just hear every peasant within earshot gasp, "Not Bessie." You cling to the imaginary lifeline that is your vegetarianism, praying that your offerings are enough to hold on to the scant scraps of self-respect and thin scraps of livestock. Amid the harsh injustice of the encounter, there's an unspoken bond born between you and the lords of yore. A bond crafted from the knowledge that their excessive indulgence, to which they refer most eloquently as royal privilege, is built atop the backs and dwindling privileges of those who toil endlessly. The next time he passes through, perhaps you'll present him with an outhouse sign decorated with an image of his face labelled the Royal Throne, a gentle reminder that all of us must answer nature's call, though yours might involve a bit more humility than his. But until that day arrives, you're left to endure this peculiar courtship with authority, wondering whether questioning it would lead to job loss or an early morning trip with a handful of beads to the local interpretation of justice. In the end, maybe it's the noble lord who sacrifices more, his sanity, his pride, though the folklore might suggest otherwise. And you, still shaking in your boots, can't help but revel in the absurdity of it all. You survived another day under the weight of a capricious lord, now submerged in your next mug of stale ale, and plotting of cabbages to come. A library? Divine inspiration. Only it smells more like old parchment and despair. Sorting through the tomes, you discover that most are positively ancient, with horrendous notes scrawled in the margins that even a literary detective wouldn't dare decipher. Endless wisdom. But hey, when the fine print mostly consists of curses, less is truly more. This is the kind of library that comes with its own collection of anxiety, as you navigate the dusty stacks that seem determined to swallow you whole. Just breathing in the air feels like you're participating in an unfathomable ritual, where learning requires a strong dose of courage and perhaps a little hazmat gear. As you venture deeper, you realise the organisation could use some divine intervention. Books are piled high in towering stacks that threaten to topple over at any second, while scrolling dust motes dance like ethereal spirits. How did it go from the sacred repository of knowledge to a pre-apocalypse survivalist nightmare? You find yourself asking that one important question. Is it really worth wrestling with tomes that seem to hold the secrets to life and death? Or are they only leading you toward a headache and the possibility of discovering a new exotic strain of mildew? If you're lucky, you might stumble upon the Biblical Atlas of Boring Existence, a well-known title among monks that chronicles the thrilling tales of burial plots and livestock management from neighbouring villages. Front to back, it's a riveting read, assuming your brain doesn't shut down from sheer boredom first. And of course, there are the works, books on theology that have the potential to ruin any good debate in about 3 pages flat. You glance at the somnolent expressions of the monks engrossed in their readings. Are they meditating hard or merely trapped in a stupor following a run-in with yesterday's cabbage? Among the tomes you might come across detailed drawings of the heavenly realms, which only fuel your imagination, where golden beams pierce clouds inhabited by archangels and fluffy sheep frolic. But let's be real. Who needs that level of fanciful thinking when your biggest concern is working out if the gruel you were served this morning was in fact still alive? The visions don't help your hunger. And speaking of visions, there's a slim volume on mysticism that you hear hoarded among novices. They say even reading it can lead to divine encounters, or at least a mild case of spellcasting envy. No one really dabbles with magic though. After all, burning at the stake is not all that appealing, despite what some quiet monks might whisper during evening prayers. You pull out a somewhat preserved manuscript titled The Art of Avoiding Work, a Monastic Guide, which might just win an award for most honest title ever. Flipping through the dog-eared pages reveals practical wisdom like, when in doubt, just start chanting. It's almost too relatable. Perfect life hack for anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by chores. However, there's a crucial note scrawled on the side that reads, "Caution. Attending Vespers won't save you from the endless scraping of pots, Brother Herman. By now, you're deep into the library rabbit hole. There are dusty scrolls stuffed haphazardly between volumes, one claiming to reveal the secrets of yielding bountiful vegetable harvests, and another promising infallible recipes for catching rats. Which is more relevant? You can't help but chuckle at the thought of a hungry monk flipping through pages, searching for culinary inspiration amidst his celibate existence. In the midst of your literary expedition, you even discover a clandestine section with tomes on advanced lice management. Someone clearly felt the need to take an academic approach to dealing with tiny nocturnal critters that nibble away at your dreams of sleeping in peace. Who would have thought that someone might painstakingly scribe ancient wisdom about ways to catch an itch in a notebook? Finally, ready to call it a day, you realise that perhaps knowledge isn't just about what's written. It's the camaraderie shared in these dusty halls of learning. It's the funny anecdotes of reading while a mouse scurries over your foot, igniting your heart rate faster than any spicy sermon ever could. These books, these conversations, these moments, they colour the drab monotony of monastic life with laughter, anxiety, and more than a tad of madness. So, as you shuffle back towards the exit, clutching a collection of dubious advice and possibly a rogue rat in your sleeve, the library now feels less like a crypt and more like a weird kind of refuge. Here, in the midst of forgotten prayers and wonky illustrations of the afterlife, knowledge is both a blessing and the occasional vague curse. Who knew you could find a sense of belonging amid chaos and questionable hygiene practices? Welcome to the monastic library, where the promise of enlightenment often stumbles over missed meals and dusty pottage. Praying isn't merely chanting, it's a rhythmic dance between silence, whispers, and the occasional disruption to share your neighbour's latest culinary disaster. You've got to find your rhythm, preferably before that annoying thought about what you forgot to harvest comes creeping in to mess up your divine groove. Each day kicks off with the bells ringing, a sound so loud and unrelenting it may as well be clanging metal pots, announcing a new level of spiritual intensity that challenges even the mightiest lumberjack's hangover. As you gather in the chapel, squeezing into your pew, or what truly resembles a wooden plank coated in a heavy layer of is that sawdust or an old turning, you can't help but feel that perhaps true enlightenment may lie over in the sunflower field. Still, as your fellow monks shuffle in, looks of profound concentration plastered across their faces, you decide it's best to not look entirely uninterested. After all, going to heaven isn't just about hoping someone might cut you a break on the afterlife. And the prayers. Oh, the prayers. They're multi-layered, an intricate texture that runs the gamut of volume, tone, and dubious linguistic clarity. Some monks have perfected the art of the low and slow, their voices sliding like honey off a warm biscuit. Others screech like they're auditioning for a role in the world's most unfortunate opera. You find yourself caught in the tumultuous middle, your tone oscillating between hopeful murmurs and desperate attempts at harmony, thinking that if only your pitch could reach the chandeliers, you might finally find redemption, or at least a sweet-smelling candlelit trail leading you to a more delicious form of sustenance. But then there's the seasoned monk, Brother Archibald, who insists on folding every prayer into a narrative that puts nearly every biblical epic to shame. You can almost bank on the fact that halfway through you will hear how one time, at band camp, a pilgrimage, Brother Archibald prophesied the choicest crops from cornfields blessed by saints, because he mistook his neighbour's goats for various deities. His story spirals into the dawn sky like an overcooked piece of bread, leaving your prayers hanging awkwardly in the air like wet laundry on a rainy day. As you prattle through the prayers, your mind wanders, pondering whether the other monks share similar daydreams. Do they also picture being alone at the river with a basket of fresh fruit rather than contemplating stockpiling cabbage for an entire winter? Perhaps some daydream running headfirst into the arms of a friendly apple tree, where a bunch of jubilant apples cry, "Save yourself, we're mildly edible, savour us." You can't forget the individual approach to prayer either, where tilting your head just right becomes an art. Brother Nicholas holds a firm belief that the louder he shouts praises, the greater his chance of garnering divine favour. So, naturally, his favourite move is to raise both arms dramatically, sending a glimmering whiff of musty wool into the air while simultaneously elbowing the monk next to him, who's attempting to conjure up peace through soft meditative humming, completely off course. The rhythm of prayer dances dangerously close to an unexpected wrestling match without the padded mats and enthusiastic fanfare. And then there are the chants, harmonious, sometimes soothing, yet often leading you toward auditory confusion. You'll find a catchy tune starts off fine, but soon morphs into an operatic train wreck as everyone seems to forget the original melody. A few of the monks become led astray, and suddenly you're left questioning, not whether God is watching, but wondering why no one can seem to distinguish between the harmony of heaven and the strumming of a cat on a piano left beneath a tree slightly too far from the chapel. And just when you think you've locked in with the right groove, an unexpected sneeze rolls through the congregation like an avalanche, causing heads to turn, followed by snickers and skyward glances. Ah, yes, nothing quite emphasises your piety like an accidental derailing of Brothers Hubert's reverent amen into peals of laughter at what could only be described as an embarrassing moment in the midst of holy utterance. But then, just when silence settles back in, you catch sight of the dawn light warming the stone walls around you. Perhaps there's something to be ignited in this sombre yet vibrant routine, a glimmer of connection not only with the cosmos, but with every body who shared their space in these hallowed halls. After all, prayer may be a play between seriousness and the absurd, a light-heartedness tangled with deep admiration for the miracle of life, which, at the end of the day, may perhaps even grant you a perfectly imperfect world stuffed tightly with contentious veggies and well-hearted monks, all trying to find their way through the noise of devotion. In the end, as you sit there, slightly warmed from contemplation while barely suppressing a laugh over Bro Archibald's far-flung tale, you realise prayer isn't just an exercise in reverence. It's a symphony of everything that binds humanity, echoing through the ages in its joyful noise and quirky contradictions, connecting you and your fellow monks not only with divinity, but also to the life that looms beyond the sturdy monastery walls. When the monks break into song, it's time for you to hold your ears and ponder if you might die from, enjoying the unique vocal style of the congregation. Off-key or slightly out of sync, their efforts could raise the dead, and not in the good way. You could use the diversion as a makeshift torture session instead. In reality, you're witnessing a spectacle that could only be deemed as a symphony of suffering, a cacophony of chants that might leave you questioning your own sanity. The lofty ceilings of the monastery amplify their attempts at holiness, bouncing the off-pitched sound waves around like a rogue rubber ball in the hands of a hyperactive child. Picture this: a group of tunic-clad men, sporting beards so long they could be mistaken for mini-wonky curtains, stand in carefully arranged lines. They're committed to this morning ritual of sacred songs, as if the key to heaven hinges on their ability to carry a note above the excitement of last night's cabbage. Their arms flap dramatically as they intone, reminiscent of birds trying their best to imitate a frog, all while you lean against the stone wall, desperately trying to keep a straight face and not laugh. But hold on, don't let the entertaining lack of melody distract you. Just as you nearly choke on your suppressed laughter, you realise their shouts have a very real purpose. They're battling the demons of monotony and the threat of returning to that porridge you'd rather not think about. Besides, who wouldn't be inspired by a chance for a good distraction? The monks' voices crescendo like that awkward moment you realise your favourite show has suddenly turned into a documentary on fungi, forcing you to make escalating noises to signal your internal struggle for focus. After all, there are no guitars, no rhythm section, just a bunch of seal-like figures wailing away, trying to create a heavenly symphony while inadvertently crafting a new sound you've dubbed pious pie throwing. And their gestures are fascinating. You can see them getting increasingly heated with their flailing arms and exaggerated expressions, as if by sheer will they can force the tune to sound less atrocious. The worst part, you might actually be tempted to join in, driven to contribute your own off-key contribution. That's right, one quick mutter of Amen could transform you into the surprise feature act at an event no one desires. If you accidentally belt out the wrong note, heads will turn, and you might just unlock a new arena of social despair. Who needs friends when you have a faithful audience of amused monks watching you go down in history as the one who ruined the morning hymn? After what feels like an eternity, the final note lingers in the air, almost like a stench that won't leave your nostrils. They clap each other on the back for that job well done, clearly taking pride in their declared victory over the universe's musical standards. With a solemn air they disperse, leaving you befuddled. Did you just witness worship or a desperate call for help? Either way, it's already sunk into your memory, a reminder that the path to enlightenment might not be paved with golden coins, but can definitely lead through terrifying listening experiences. As you slowly make your way to the garden, reflecting on how divine proportions have somehow turned into a comedy show, you can't help but suppress a grin. Amidst the hay and slightly rancid cabbages, you find a metaphor for life in these halls. Everything is a little off-kilter, much like the singing. If the monks can tackle the mundane with laughter and joy, then perhaps life, with all its endless drudgery and oddities, can be approached in a similar way. After all, one person's tragedy can lead to hilarity for another, and maybe the true art of living in a monastery is in turning hymns meant for piety into hearty laughter over the silly follies of the mind. So as you saunter out into the morning light, you can't help but feel a little lighter. The next time those monks holler in unison, you might just open your mouth and join in the delightful disaster, knowing full well it's not just a hymn, it's a union of laughter wrapped up in their collective absurd existence. Embrace the hymn, relish the hiccups, and enjoy this chaotic serenade to whatever remains of your sanity. Yes, the neighbours might be just as confused as you. They steal glances during prayers, attempt to outdo your barley harvest, and crop rumours about you over their own bad cabbage soup. Where did you go wrong? Did you fail to kneel in the right direction? Welcome to monastic life, where even socialising feels like an intense competition for the approval of individuals who can only be described as your friendly neighbourhood, suspicious monks. You can practically feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on you like a slab of medieval stone. As you sit in the pews, dutifully reciting your daily prayers, there's always that one monk, Brother Eustace, whispering in undertones about your inferior grain. You glance over, half expecting him to brandish a pitchfork in an impromptu showdown over the quality of your barley. What do you have to do to earn some respect around here? Maybe wear a hat that screams barley champion. Old Eustace peering at you with one eyebrow raised could probably pierce through a castle wall, and with every nudge in your direction comes the nagging feeling that your troubles don't end at the chapel. They extend right into your garden. Ah yes, the monastic garden, sacred ground for both prayer and peril. Perfectly manicured rows of cabbages and carrots stand tall, demanding your constant attention, while your neighbour's vegetation somehow grows taller, healthier, and brighter. There's a rumour that they whisper sweet nothings to their crops, holding secret midnight ceremonies to ensure a bountiful harvest, all while you're just trying to remember whether basil is a spice or the most nutritious rat bait. And that annual cabbage off. It's a fierce event where every monk brings their prized vegetables to compete for glory. No pressure. You've tried to befriend your neighbours, asking them for gardening advice over the fence that separates your plots like a medieval Berlin Wall. But instead of helpful suggestions, all you got were subtle snickers about your lack of green thumb. You made a vow to outgrow the competition. But how can you pray for help when you're too busy glaring at Brother Clement's kale, which seems to yield envy from every leaf? And then there's the feasting. During gatherings, everyone is all smiles. But erstwhile you're forced to sit there, your own bowl of gruel looking like it has been filtered through a strainer meant for goats. To make matters worse, you can hear those slurping and chomping sounds coming from the next table, where those very same monks hoard their bounty like squirrels before a storm. Is that a hint of bacon grease wafting over from their table? You wince, mentally placing yourself at the bottom of the culinary caste system. At some point you decide enough is enough. With determination you resolve to concoct a dish to end all dishes. Inspired by fancy new peasant recipes, you jovially borrowed, you whip up some mysterious broth that contains questionable ingredients gathered from the woods, mixed mushrooms, herbs that might still be alive, and an optimism that exceeds all other rational thoughts go into that kettle. As you sit back, admiring your delightful creation, you're blissfully unaware that your neighbours, perhaps guided by the smell or perhaps by the prospect of amusement, are gearing up for a taste test. Naturally, the bowl full of splendidly dubious concoctions meets with mixed reviews and raucous laughter. Your culinary debut leads to direct comparisons between you and Brother Otis's potato surprise, which, while admittedly bland, seems to carry the palate of a king compared to your science experiment. Who knew the monks could be so brutal, treating food like a dissected frog in biology class? Throughout the day, you can't shake the uneasy sensation that rumours will morph into legends about your gourmet failures, and the disapproving glances from your neighbours will soon become weaponised in a battle for monastic social standing. As evening descends, the light fading away along with your peace of mind, you ponder whether it is worth it to strive for their approval or simply shrug it off. As you drift off into restless sleep, praying that tomorrow might bring lighter meals and lighter hearts, you realise that perhaps the best approval you can earn is simply by being yourself, however unskilled that may be in the complicated art of gardening, cooking, or even fitting into the peculiar tapestry of monastic life. After all, you survived a day in the monastery where expectations and opinions are as layered as the pickled mackerel bobbing in that awful stew, so who's judging who, really? Ah, a festival! The one time you might actually sample non-liquid bread and slosh some ale that doesn't substitute for thin cough syrup. But beware. Everyone's crazy cousin probably also took this as a cue to drum loudly and recount his misadventures pretending to be a dragon last summer. Why is every toast about prior disasters? Yet despite the questionable entertainment and weirdly repetitive stories, this is your chance to indulge, read, slightly overindulge, and pretend life is anything but grim while you munch on whatever vaguely food-like substances are available. The atmosphere is buzzing, a cacophony of laughter, off-key singing, and the occasional disgruntled shout when someone else's goat steals your seat. You find yourself shoulder to shoulder with a crowd of monks and villagers debating fiercely, not about the weather or the upcoming harvest, but whether or not the notorious Lord Scuttlebutt truly did get eaten by a bear while napping in the woods. You can smell the celebration in the air, smoky meats, stale bread, and the faint scent of something that might once have been beer, but now resembles overly fermented swamp water. Still, this is what you signed up for. As festivities kick off, the head monk, who insists he's too pure for ale, starts drumming up a spiritual speech, rallying the crowd to remember all the blessings bestowed upon you, despite your woefully muddy shoes. You exchange knowing glances with the girl next to you, who spills ale as she cheerfully sways to the semi-competent rhythm of the lute, its notes jangling in the air like a terrified squirrel trapped in a jester's hat. You drum your fingers against a table splattered with leftover food and splatters of inexplicable sauces from a meal nobody wants to reminisce about. Just as the head monk is about to tap into what is apparently a deep philosophical commentary on harvest blessings, the festivities begin in earnest. A makeshift stage materializes where monks who've attended Thealed quite a few lessons in performance art kick off a series of antics that can only be described as medieval mime meets interpretive dance. The local villagers cheer enthusiastically, and you can't help but laugh. You're both horrified and amused at this new form of self-expression that borders on art. And by art, you mean the kind that sends children scurrying away and dogs howling in despair. Then come the food contests. Yes, the monks challenge people to participate in eating competitions. Why? Because if you haven't got fitness, you must have gas. Oh, and let's not forget the treacherous pie-eating contest. Pies that have been sitting out all day in the sun while half the locals argue whether it was made with overripe fruits or moonshine's misfired cousin, a mystery you're nervously nibbling at while praying for a spoonful of healing broth to follow. Shuffle next to the pie table, and you overhear someone mutter about the last. Guy who dipped into the sweet pie swearing it contains special herbs. You can't tell if that's just the ale talking or if this is actually a food poisoning conspiracy. Your cousin Gilbert, in a show of bravado, decides he's Brad the Pie King and starts chugging bites down like he's attempting to eat his way out of a loan shark's debt. Spoiler alert, he isn't, and the resulting disaster involves more spilled pie than anyone has witnessed since the Great Blueberry Catastrophe of '98, in which your aunt unsuccessfully attempted to bake her way into your family's recipe book. As hours slip by, you find yourself clutching your belly in horror, half wishing you'd pulled back on the number of pies, or at least chosen the less dubious varieties. But hey, it's a festival, and there's an opportunity to dance. Join in an awkward circle of clumsy footsteps, swaying from side to side while the head monk tries going hard on a dance of purification. Your feet ache under the weight of the day, and sweating your sins away in summer attire is an unwelcome passage to glory. The night winds to a close, and, as the last few mugs of ale stagger about the village like wayward children, festival goers begin to drift back into their homes. Harvest moons hang low, glistening ominously over the bonfire residue of your one shot at an entire year's worth of joy condensed into a single day. Tomorrow will return to hard labour and obligatory prayers. But for now, your belly is full of ale and questionable meat, your heart is bursting with laughter, and for one bright day, you've been able to forget that you effectively live like a goat herder with a headache. So, cheers to the festival, dear listener, where the food might give you the runs, the music might give you tinnitus, and the drinking will likely haunt you until next year's overblown celebration. Just remember, the real feast has nothing to do with the plates but the friends who can still stand after a day of unholy revelry, and that counts for something, or at least a sore back come morning. Among the monks, extraordinary beliefs emerge. Pick your poison. From dubious claims about curing earaches with a music note to predictions involving farming outcomes based on lunar cycles, you soon realise the sword of distrust hangs over every holy decision they've made until the harvest finally comes in. You ponder if the monastery should be rebranded as a quaint little circus, where the only ticket you need is faith, or should it really be called Monks Gone Wild? Take Brother Bartholomew, for instance. the resident herbalist who insists that a tincture of fermented cabbage can cure everything from the common cold to existential dread. One evening, you overhear him fervently explaining how this magical brew is made by chanting the abbey's motto, while simultaneously mixing in a secret blend of herbs that looks suspiciously like the weeds from the courtyard. One inquisitive monk raises his hand and asks, "But what if it tastes terrible?" Bartholomew, without missing a beat, replies, "Ah, if it tastes bad, it's surely doing its job." With questionable logic like that, it's no wonder you're left scratching your head while dodging disdainful looks from the rogue peasant mice, who seem to find the whole scene incredibly entertaining. As you contemplate Bartholomew's brewing, remember, if questionable messengers threw out divine health tips, your chances of immunity against plagues are basically down the drain. And let's not forget the lunar cycle predictions, which Brother Ignatius adamantly supports while shuffling around the garden like a detective on the hunt. He passionately tells anyone willing to listen that planting potatoes on a waxing gibbous will guarantee the starchy delights flourish dramatically. The moon's mere wax indeed guaranteed a bountiful harvest. That is, until you realise, last time you did this, you wound up with an abundance of rocks instead of tubers, leading to your humble supper being the best stony soup that no one ever wanted to eat. But Brother Ignatius still holds on to that belief like it's a crown, his eyebrows shooting up in defiance toward any valid evidence to the contrary. With some monks convinced they are prophetic agricultural wizards, you begin playing your own version of mental Olympics. Is it too late to suggest that perhaps using common sense was a more reliable approach? Here's a thought. Wouldn't actual farming practices serve better than moon rituals and the sly murmurs of the mysterious garlic cult? As your midnight thoughts drift, you genuinely wonder if you've fallen under some bizarre collective illness. Symptoms presenting as delusional faith in fellow monks' grasp on agricultural success. As these wacky ideas unfold, the air grows thick with more than just the sweet scent of ill-prepared cabbage stew. It's like each theory is another chapter of chaotic medieval imagination swirling around the stone walls of the abbey. You start to imagine a secret support group where monks write crazy agricultural prophecies on chaff pieces, because hey, wouldn't that make for an exciting read around morning prayer? Or perhaps the believers should channel their inner herbalist for actual advice, because a little less jazz hands and a little more, hey, don't shove the growth of vegetables, could result in actual edibles come summertime. Each step around the cloister feels like you're traversing a comedy club instead. So many expectant faces looking at the skies for signs. Is it a sign of bountiful crops? A storm? Or possibly the arrival of a truly remarkable new recipe for pea soup? Surely someone up there must know, and if not, well, that only makes for an even better memoir. In between chuckles and gallant attempts to dodge yet another absurd prediction, you try to maintain some level of stoic demeanour, while only half-heartedly agreeing with the absurdities shared around the wooden table during supper. But you can't help but smile at these good-natured monks and their amusing quests. They are strangely endearing, your unworldly band of merry men, united not just in culinary failures, but in a lifelong journey to make sense of a senseless world. As you attempt to navigate this whimsical tapestry of beliefs, you realise that however misguided the knowledge may seem, it's a thread, an essential part of the day-to-day life within the monastery. Perhaps through their shared absurdity, they've all unknowingly crafted a deep connection amidst the uncertainty, ever faithful to the absurdities of life, while still struggling toward a higher, albeit goofy, purpose. And in that sense, maybe all of their unusual beliefs aren't so strange after all. When life hands you cabbage and coefficients of faith, just wear it like a badge of absurd honour. Maybe the food finally got to your head, or could you genuinely be having visions? That's right. As your stomach grumbles through the day, you must wrestle with the veiled dispute. Are you truly blessed, or did the mystery meat finally put you in a bizarre haze? Standing near that dusty altar probably isn't making it any clearer. Picture this. You're there, surrounded by your fellow monks, clad in wool that feels more like a friendly sheep hugging you rather than a fashion statement. You glance around, and suddenly that prayer about divine insights morphs into something decidedly unnatural regarding your center of existence. Let's break it down. Your eyes are scanning the flickering candle flames, and as that haze begins to set in, a concoction of hunger, fatigue, and an abundance of incense, you could swear the plastered saints are nodding approvingly. Is that St. Benedict giving you a wink? Or has the goose from last night's pot roast decided to pay you a visit, clearly demanding a rematch? Those mosaic tiles underfoot seem to shift like a kaleidoscope, and you wonder if perhaps the altar itself holds the secret to enlightenment, or merely yesterday's soup recipe. If only the mystery meat had been a little more transparent. If you haven't noticed already, it's easy to get lost in these moments, like when you're desperately praying for divine intervention to bless your cabbage stew with a dash of flavour, or plead for the frogs beside the well to grant you companionship over a rousing chorus of croaks. Oh, speak to me, flickering flame of destiny, you beg quietly, hoping the flickering flames will reveal that yes, dinner is indeed just around the corner. But all you get in return is a smoke whisper hinting that divine dinners are not on the menu tonight. And here's the kicker. Visions aren't just reserved for the spiritually enlightened. No, they're everywhere here, as casual as the vile smell of the monastery's unwashed linens, which for some reason never truly leave the premises. You might run into a fellow monk claiming to have seen the angels dancing on the roof during your evening prayers. Seeing angels? Be careful, you think. Those could just be the leftovers of last Sunday's supper you neglected to finish. Surely the angels wouldn't show up on an empty stomach. Now this whole hallucination business gets tricky. How do you tell if you're having a prophetic dream, or if that last bit of questionable pottage is just causing you to merge your troubled thoughts with fantastical reveries? It's a thin line indeed. Is that shimmering light in the corner of your eye simply reflections from the lamp flickering overhead? Or did you accidentally ingest a slice of pulpy fruit from last year's harvest? You'll spend hours pondering if being pious means sacrificing your taste buds, or if this is merely the universe's way of keeping you humble. Who knew? The truth is, visions become dangerously comforting. You start to embrace unsettling thoughts that perhaps those hallowed figures in the chapel have something to share. Oh, but here's the thing. They never do. That pious praying only leads you to stints of clenching your teeth around walnuts, outpouring prayers for edible rations that don't turn your stomach inside out. And suddenly, you're wondering if the purpose of monastic life was merely to ensure everyone had the privilege of silently crying over how badly the meal tasted. With that in mind, dicing cabbage may just be the culinary equivalent of divining the fate of your soul. Dreams of becoming an artisan of the kitchen turn into a dunk in a vat of hot soup when you least expect it. The realization that every meal could lead to heavenly visions or sweet blissful stomach pains adds layers of urgency to prayer. So, here you are, teetering quietly in your wooden squeaky shoes at yet another evening service, nervously eyeing the pew with hope. Moments of humour sneak you through the divine protocol, and you catch yourself chuckling into your prayer. Could the saints, those stone faces carved to carry dread through eons, hear you through the brutal truths you're ready to voice? In the end, the line separating celestial insight from culinary horror resides somewhere tangled in the chaos of your last meal. Here's to the daily struggles of those who seek to become holy enough to shrug off bad ancestors, relying instead on cabbage garlands that whisper, Just keep chewing. And let's face it, no one deep in prayer has ever really known what they were eating, and maybe that's the real divine intervention. With all that boundless energy spent, now we return full circle to the morning light. The smell of wet hay, last night's questionable leftovers, and the memory of blessed silence wrap around you like an old blanket you're too afraid to wash. This monastic life isn't exactly heaven on earth, but at least you're alive, bruised, battered, and probably immortalised in some medieval manuscript as that guy who ate cabbages in his haystack. Nestled within the stone walls of your sacred sanctuary, the atmosphere somehow defies all expectations. The sunlight filters through the narrow windows, casting long shadows that hint at the bewildering prospect of another day. Let's take a moment here. As you sit on your hay-stuffed mattress that definitely isn't affecting your back in any way, have you ever thought about how much time you spend wishing for freedom while simultaneously dreading the outside world? It's a conundrum. You contemplate the breakfast pottage that's waiting for you. Surely a delightful mix of yesterday's scrapings with a touch of regret, while on the other side of the heavy woods outside, life is thriving. People are decorating stalls with fresh produce, probably commenting on how shockingly bulky your waistband has become thanks to that extra bit of ale you guzzled last night. Who knew bartering for additional tunics could lead to such trade-offs? No doubt, the dawn chorus of birdsong anchors your thoughts, reminding you that everyone's getting on with their day. Little do they know that you just survived another night in the monastery, a feat that deserves a medal, or at least a better breakfast option. Have you imagined what your life would look like outside these stone walls? Perhaps you'd be contrasting your neighbour's unwillingness to tend to their pruning while you masterfully juggle 3 goats and an impressive vegetable patch. But alas, here you are, in this cloistered hall of renunciation, where adventure is more of a whispered memory than a lived reality. As you rise and shake off last night's slumber, your joints creak like a poorly maintained door hinge. The formidable task of dressing transforms into a wrestling match as you tangle yourself in your habitual smock, like a thatched roof ever so eager to collapse. But the unrelenting call of duty drives you onward. A ton of chores awaits. As you shuffle toward the refectory, the cobblestones underfoot remind you that nothing about this place is straightforward. Hunger gnaws at your insides, serving as your less than favourable alarm clock. Yes, it's time to face the daily disaster known as breakfast. You enter the refectory where others gather, holding their wooden bowls like pathetic trophies from last night's shameful feast. Wondering how long it's been since anyone thoroughly scrubbed this room is the easy part. It's the dreadful realisation that breakfast might be remnants of yesterday's culinary experiments that make you ponder the meaning of endurance. As bowls of speckled pottage are ladled out, perhaps now's the time to embrace a daily mantra. It's good for the soul. If no one else believed that, at least you'd have something to chant while swallowing down swill that looks suspiciously like a soup that may have once seen summer. After the completed meal, the bustling of duties calls your name with the enthusiasm of an enraged cat. The monks around you flurry like bees around a garden filled with wildflowers, each one on his own quest for productivity. You sweep with the zeal of 1,000 derailed thoughts, feverishly attempting to tidy while whispering desperate prayers that the others don't notice you snacking scraps, all in the name of food preservation. A plan is hatched. Perhaps one day you'll even sneak in a real meal while everyone is preoccupied sorting tomes that look as old as time itself. As the day wears on, the burdens of the monastery begin to lift just enough for you to realise that amidst this chaos lies a strange form of camaraderie. Bonding over shared meals, terrible ale, and gossip about the slow-moving next-door neighbour grows warm like the faded sunlight soaking into the walls around you. discovering that even the most silent monks have their passions, be it prayers, woodwork, or a secret love for mischief. Feelings of isolation are shattered. In this rugged labyrinth of devotion, you've somehow become part of something significant, albeit profoundly odd and entirely medieval. So as the last remnants of daylight burst into your makeshift haven, wrapping you in its warm embrace, remember, living in a monastery might lack the excitement of adventure, but it unfolds an unsuspecting reality filled with moments of realness. Take a breath and let the chaotic mix of your once frivolous dreams and current situation sink in. You're not just existing in this monastic lifestyle, you're surviving every weird and wonderful turn that it throws at you, while nourishing yourself with hearty smiles, a bit of mischief, and perhaps even a secret stash of the best cabbages in the vicinity.